Financial power of attorney is probably one of the more important documents we're gonna use and utilize in the estate planning process. And then a marital agreement is always a good piece to have of the puzzle. That basically allows for it to be a property. It's a little bit easier to administer the assets that you own. Next one. The financial durable power of attorney. Usually when I do this, it's a little bit different for me because I'm used to standing in front of people and being able to ask questions and stuff like that. But basically, what happens if you do not have a financial durable power of attorney is that somebody is put in place for you. You have to go to court to have that, to have somebody be able to take over your finances and do things for you. Basically, a power of attorney is you're appointing somebody if you become incapacitated to take care of your finances. It could be everything from running a business to selling a house to just paying the bill. So it's everything under the sun. And if you don't have one of those, you have to go to court and somebody is put into place for you. It's called a guardian, and that person makes decisions for you. And that can be pretty tedious and it can be pretty expensive. And then the other question we have on the screen is, won't any old power of attorney do? You know, can't I go online and get a power of attorney or just have one that says, you know, such and such is able to do everything for me financially? It's not really the case anymore. What happens when we're dealing in the area that we're going to be dealing with tonight with Medicaid, they want to see specific powers that are in place to do certain things, to do this certain type of planning. And if it's not specified in that document, you might have to go to court to do it, or you won't be able to do it at all. And so one of the first steps is having a really good financial power of attorney that takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. We can go to the next slide, Jeff. There are three ways of paying for nursing home. There is Medicare, private pay or long-term care insurance, and then Medicaid. The government's made it very easy for us by giving almost the exact same name to every program. So what happens is that everybody says Medicare when they mean Medicaid. They say Medicaid when they mean Medicare. It gets very confusing, and that may be by design. I'm not sure. I guess it depends on how cynical you are. But the Medicare basically covers when you're in the hospital. Medicare is for anybody over 65 years old. It is a healthcare plan, basically. Medicare only pays for a certain amount of days that you're in the hospital, and you have to be showing certain amount of progressing in your health for it to cover it. And as soon as you're not progressing or that those days run out, it's over. It doesn't cover anything else. Now, what will happen is if it goes to paying for long-term care, then you'll have to private pay if Medicare is not paying for it. And one of the best ways to kind of private pay is to have a long-term care policy in place. With most of my clients, we will have them go and talk to somebody regarding long-term care insurance, getting a long-term care policy. And the reason is it gives you more options than you're going to have if you just went on Medicaid. So basically, we're talking about a long-term care policy that might cover in-home care. It might cover assisted living, and it would cover nursing home. So it gives you a lot more options. It gives you a better chance of paying for those sorts of different stages that you would be in. Jeff, are you able to speak? Jeff, are you able to speak at all?
I can, yes. I had myself on mute. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you just wanted to talk about long-term care for a second.
Oh, sure.
That you do, in fact, offer long-term care policies.
Right. Yeah, there's two ways to go about it. There's the traditional long-term care policies where you would get set up with a certain daily maximum amount, or you would purchase a daily maximum amount, $100 a day, $150 a day, $200 a day. And then you would start paying those premiums until the day comes that you would need to utilize those, utilize that policy for long-term care needs. They're typically most cost-effective if you start when you're younger. The older you are, the more the premiums become on a monthly basis. So if you're 55 plus, they tend to get pretty expensive. A couple years ago, companies started to create hybrid type policies where they combine either an annuity with a long-term care rider or a life insurance policy with a long-term care rider. And those have become more and more popular way to fund long-term care. It allows you to put money into a life insurance policy, so it has a dual purpose. One, you have a death benefit, so if something ever happens to you prior to maybe going into a care facility, the death benefit would go to a loved one. Now, if you go into a care facility or require in-home care or assisted living, those are also triggering events that those types of policies can pay out on. And so they've become pretty useful as becoming a part of the asset protection tool for people who are looking at protecting their assets utilizing long-term care type instruments.
And I would hope that everybody, as part of their financial plan, does take a good look at long-term care insurance policy and see that how it fits into their plan. If you cannot get a long-term care policy, which happens sometimes, you have a pre-existing condition of some sort, you don't kind of work in that for that person that gets those sorts of policies, then the way that you would pay for nursing home would be Medicaid system. Medicaid is go to the next slide. I'm sorry, Jeff. Go to the next slide. Medicaid is basically government assistance. It covers long-term care, so it only covers nursing home. And you must have a medical need or a financial need. What we mean by that is that that if you're in assisted living, in most cases, Medicaid will not cover the assisted living costs. In most cases, it will not cover in-home care. There are certain waivers you can get that sometimes Medicaid will cover those, but they're few and far between, and there's such an exception that we basically just say that it only covers nursing home care. So we'll go from that premise today that Medicaid will only cover nursing home care, not assisted living, and not in-home care. And when we said it needs a medical need and a financial need, this is a two-pronged test that Medicaid requires from you. And we can go to the next slide, Jeff. There's the Medicaid, basically it's medical eligibility. You must have a medical need. It does, it's going to be eating, dressing, bathing, toilet, getting around, things of that nature. It's not going to be, somebody who doesn't have a medical problem of some sort. This prong of the Medicaid test is generally taken care of by the doctors. This is not my expertise. We basically have them sent to a doctor, and then the doctor will say that they don't have, they'll need assistance doing certain things. And that usually is pretty evident, without having any kind of expertise. Go to the next one, please. The financial eligibility part of Medicaid is where we come in getting people eligible for Medicaid. And like any government program, there are prongs to that one also. And so there's a two-prong test to the financial eligibility, which is income and your resources. You have to pass both of them. If you fail on either one of them, you cannot get on Medicaid. We go to the next slide, which is the income part of it. Basically, your income cannot exceed the cost of your care. If you're paying $10,000 a month for nursing home care and your income is at $12,000, you fail. And the reason is because of all of your income goes towards paying for your care. If you are if you're receiving a pension of $15,000 a month, you can pay for all your care because it would all go towards paying for that. Most people do not, basically fail this test. I've had one client in 20 years that had more income a month than their cost of their care. So everybody fails this one. Or I should say everybody passes this one. Everybody fails to have more income. So what it generally is that the person's Social Security, pension, and any income that they receive will go towards their care. The community spouse or the well spouse, the person that is not in the nursing home, can have around $2,500 of income. So in a situation where the spouse that goes into the nursing home, say, is receiving the bulk of the income from the family, that well spouse can kind of steal enough money from them to get up to about $2,500. An example of that would be Bob goes into a nursing home and he gets $1,500 of Social Security and income a month, and Sally is in the house. Sally and she gets, let's say, $1,000 of Social Security a month. She could take the $1,500 from Bob's income and keep it. It's basically a way to preserve that the community spouse does not go to poverty. Anything excess over that gets paid to the nursing home. So if Bob had $5,000 of income that month, she could steal enough to get up to $2,500, but the residue of that would go towards paying for Bob's care. The next one is the financial eligibility for resources. The income part of it, as I said, most people pass that because their income is not more than the cost of their care. The resource part of it becomes a little bit more difficult. Resources are just everything that you own. And a single person is allowed to have a whopping $2,000 of assets when they apply for Medicaid. Most of us would fail that. We're going to have more than $2,000 of assets. You are allowed to have, on top of that $2,000, a grand total of $1,500 of life insurance, a burial plot, a funeral trust, your personal property outside of anything that's not really excessive. You could have a car, and then all other assets must be spent down. So when we say that single person has to have $2,000 of assets and have life insurance and burial plots and things, that's it. One major thing that I'm leaving out of there is an IRA or a 401k. That is not exempt. That has to be spent down. So you can only have $2,000 of assets as the single person. If you go to the next slide, if you're married, again, the person that's in the nursing home can have $2,000 funeral trust, burial fund, so on and so forth. The spouse that's in at home, that is the well spouse, we should say, they get to keep more assets. They basically get to keep between $50,000 and $126,000, give or take, of money. It depends on what their marital assets are, and then it's half of that, and so it kind of falls in that range of $50,000 to $126,000. Plus, they can have exempt assets, and certain assets are exempt for the spouse that's living in the house. The primary residence is an exempt asset, so it basically does not count towards the amount of money they can have. Also, a car does not count towards the amount of money they can have also, if it's reasonable. You can have a tricked out SUV, but you can't have a Bentley. That usually, won't get past the Medicaid people. You can have personal items. So you could have guns, you can have riding mowers, things of that nature, anything that is kind of personal items, again, as long as it's reasonable and not considered to be an investment. And you could have, and this is probably the most important thing, you could have a retirement account if you are the spouse that's well and at home. You could have an IRA, you could have a 401k. Those assets are exempt for the person that's at home. But again, the spouse that's in the nursing home, their 401k or IRA is not exempt. So it has to be spent down, which really kind of stinks.
What about the residence in both of our names?
You can go to the next asset. So with that amount of assets you can have, the question becomes, why can't you just give all of it away? Why can't you just basically give everything away except for $126,000, your house, your, a car, and $2,000? Well, it used to be that you could just kind of give everything away and then you could apply for Medicaid. Very quickly, though, they kind of caught on to that you could have $1 million and then the next day, give everything away and apply for Medicaid. So they instituted these look-back periods. Used to be 3 years. It's now 5 years. And if you give away anything within the 5-year period that they look back at, it's considered to be a divestment. So if I had $1 million today, I gave away that $1 million to my kids, let's say, and they, and I apply for Medicaid the next day, they're going to look back over a 5-year period and say, Pat, you gave away $1 million. And they're going to disqualify me from giving away that amount of money. Now, I get the question a lot, well, I can give away $15,000 a year, right? And you can give away $15,000 a year to anyone. However, that's only for gift tax purposes under the IRS code. It has nothing to do with Medicaid. There is actually a presumption that every dollar you give away is for nursing home purposes. So if I give away $10,000 a year to my kids, they basically presume that I gave it away so that I could get on nursing, so I could get on Medicaid to pay for my nursing home. It's a pretty strong presumption, and you have to kind of overcome that. If you do give away an amount of money, you face an ineligibility period. You can go to the next slide, Jeff. And basically what happens there is that they take the amount of money that you gave away, they divide it by the average nursing home cost, and then that's how long you're ineligible for. So for example, mom gives away a $100,000 CD to her son so that they, so she can get on Medicaid for nursing home purposes. That gift of $100,000 is a divestment. And basically what we're saying is she's giving it away for no value. For that $100,000, it's just a gift. Well, the average nursing home costs $260 a day, and it comes out to about 385 days that she would be ineligible before she Medicaid.
I tried to turn ours off.
And that would basically
I'm gonna jump in here. I'm getting that there's a lot of echo in the video or so I'm gonna mute everybody except for Pat. So give me 1 second for doing this, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Pat.
Yeah.
Can everybody hear Pat? If you can, put your thumb up. All right, Pat, you're on.
Okay. So just in summary, if you give away all of your assets to your kids or to a stranger or whatever it is, and you don't get any value for it, they're going to penalize you if it's done within a 5-year period. And so what ends up happening a lot of times is that people can pre-plan for nursing home costs and move certain assets with the idea that that 5-year period is going to pass. And we call that preemptive planning. There's basically 2 types of planning, and we can go to the next slide. There's basically 2 types of planning. There's preemptive planning, and there's emergency planning. Emergency planning is, what did I have a client one time that I said, when is your dad going into a nursing home? And she said 2 o'clock. That's emergency planning. Preemptive planning would be something more of, I've retired and there are some assets I want to protect from a nursing home if I would ever go into one. And it might be like land up north. It might be the house, or it might be an inheritance or something of that nature. And that would come to preemptive planning. We can go to the next slide, Jeff. Some preemptive planning it's not imminent that I'm going into a nursing home. This isn't I've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and, the chances of going 5 years is not good. Preemptive planning would be you're in good health, relatively speaking, that you have assets that are, you're able to protect, but you're not going to be actively living on. And the best assets for protecting for long-term care preemptively are like the house, cottage, hunting land. As I said, assets you're not going to be living off of. A good asset, I'm trying to come up with an example, but the example might be, you have a house, you have a cottage, and you have a Vanguard account or something of that nature, or you're working with Jeff and he's, you're taking money out so that you're actively living off of it. Those aren't good assets to generally protect for long-term care if you're required to pay the rent, so to speak, on it. You want assets that you can kind of forget about. That might be an inheritance that you receive from a parent that you're not actively using. You're just kind of managing it, but you're not actively using it. The other thing that would be good preemptive planning would be taking care of the caregivers. Those are the people that are taking care of mom and dad, let's say. And these can be available to either single people or to married couples. You can go to the next example. So for example, if mom would go into a nursing home, she'd have to spend down to $2,000, as we said, before she could get any kind of medical assistance. And medical assistance can collect after death, which is one of the great points is that, after you pass away, they come to you, they come to the estate, I should say, and they basically want to collect after you've died. And so if you haven't moved an asset out of your name, per se, they can collect from that. And so the next slide will give you kind of an example of some preemptive planning. So mom has this house and she has to spend down to $2,000. She wants to do some preemptive stuff. And she can do a couple of things. She can move the asset out of her name if she wants to protect it from nursing home. Now, the reason that if she moves it out of her name, they can't put a lien against it. I'm saying medical assistants can't put a lien against it. She could give it to her kids. She can put it into their names and they would own it outright. This used to be the planning that was always done. You'd come into an attorney's office, they would say, I want to protect this from nursing home, and you would basically turn it over to your kids with a quitclaim deed, costs a couple $100, and you were good to go. 5 years passes, it's outside of the look back period, and your house is safe. The problem with it is that the house is in the children's name. And as attorneys, we kind of cringe at that because there are so many ways that, things can go wrong at that point. What we mean by that is there's no creditor protection for the kids. If a child gets divorced, if they get sued because they hit a bus full of attorneys and they got sued by all those attorneys, or they go bankrupt, the creditor, whoever that is, whether it's an ex-spouse or that is an asset to that child, and that can be gotten to by their creditors. There's no tax deduction for property taxes. If mom gives over that house to the kids, mom can't take any tax deductions anymore. It's a small thing, but it is sometimes important due to the income levels of mom or dad that is giving the house away. A big one that is missed a lot is capital gains. When mom owns the house, if she purchased it in 1965 for $100,000, that would have been pretty expensive in 1965, but just for the purposes of argument, she purchased that house in 1965 for $100,000. she gives it to the children and it's worth $250,000. And the kids sell that house, they're going to get hit with a capital gain based off of $150,000 because the gift transfers the basis in that property, which was mom's $100,000 to the kids. And there's no capital gain exemption for the kids when they sell it because it's not their primary residence. If mom had sold that house, all capital gains would have been wiped out if it's under $250,000 gain. So it's one that kind of sneaks up on the kids when they go to sell it, that there's a capital gain involved, especially if a house has been in mom or dad's possessions for a long time. And then also, and this is kind of a sad situation, that money's not guaranteed to go to mom if she needs care. The kids can practically spend the money, and there's nothing stopping anybody from doing that. Generally, what I see is that the house gets transferred to the kids in their own name, and they get sued or something happens creditor-wise that they lose the money. However, there have been situations where, luckily it hasn't been really my clients, but people have come to me and said, they gave money over to Bob and Bob went and bought a yacht with it. And what do we do? And it's sort of like, there's nothing you can do. It was Bob's money. And there's not a thing, that mom can do at that point. And so they have to come up with a way of fixing that then. We can go to the next slide. Again, it just kind of wrapping up with the children have they want to take care of mom, but they might run into some of these problems such as creditor problems or a capital gain or something like that. So there's a way of kind of getting around that. And what it is if you can create a special type of trust, and that trust doesn't allow creditors of the children to get to that asset. The children have a fiduciary duty regarding that, over that trust, so they can't go and just willy-nilly spend it. You can get property tax deductions. You can get a capital gain exemption. So if that house is sold and there's a capital gain, it gets basically wiped out. And then that money's going to be there for when mom needs while she's alive. And what we mean by that is that money is going to be there if she would go into assisted living and she would need to live off of that money. There's ways of getting it to her while she's alive, so it's there for her care. And that's really, at the end of the day, what we care about is that it's there for their care, not that the kids walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's just icing on the cake. We can go to the next slide. And so this trust that we're talking about is an irrevocable trust. We like to call it a nursing home trust just because people kind of go like, oh yeah, I get it. It's for nursing home. Irrevocable trusts kind of get a bad rap sometimes. And one of the reasons is that, you have to give up control to the asset in order for irrevocable trust to work. Those assets, though, if you give up that control and you put it in a nursing home trust, those assets are protected from the nursing home. You appoint the person that controls that asset that's in the trust. So it could be your child, it could be a friend, it could be somebody that you trust to do that. And also, you basically will have access to those funds if you would need them, which becomes an important part to the care. just kind of give you a quick example. We're doing planning for a person who has 3 pieces of property. Those properties, they're looking to do some extra planning. They have a long-term care policy. They're worried more that if that long-term care policy would end, because it's only for like a number of years, that if it would end, that there could be a problem with basically losing these properties. So what we're doing is creating a nursing home trust for her, and we are moving these assets into the trust. Now, the chances of her going 5 years are pretty good. One of the reasons is she has a long-term care policy that will pay for some years if she goes in a nursing home. But also, though she has some health problems, she's in decent health for her age. And so we feel pretty good about the 5 years. We're going to transfer that land into that trust, and her kids are going to manage the property for her. She gets to live in her home. She gets to, as we said before, take any kind of deductions for the property taxes. She gets basically full use of that property. It's just that it's going to run for 5 years, and then after that 5 years is over, no nursing home can touch it. Now, the great thing about it is if those kids would run into trouble for any reason, they would get divorced or something like that, nobody can touch that property while it's in that trust. So that's just an example that, what we're doing right now with a client that is preemptive planning regarding a nursing home trust. We go to the next slide. Also preemptive planning, and there's different types of preemptive planning, but I'm just trying to give the people on here some ideas of some things that they can do. We talked about transferring the homestead to the child, which is never a fantastic idea because of creditor problems. However, if the child has moved into mom's house and she or he is taking care of mom, and by them living in the house and taking care of mom, it is determined that they kept them out of a nursing home, which the doctor determines, then the transfer of that property to that child is exempt. It's an exception that is not used very often. I think I've used it maybe twice in my career, but it is there. If there's anybody out there that has moved into mom or dad's house, or they have a child that has moved into their house and is currently taking care of them, and without that care, they would have been in a nursing home, the house could be transferred to that child without penalty if that child has resided there for 2 years. So it is an exception. There's also an exception of a sibling residing in the home for a year. Again, this is something I think one time this came up, but it works, is that if there's a siblings are living together and for that year they live together, you can transfer it to the sibling without there being a penalty. Why these exceptions exist? I think it's just because it keeps people out of nursing homes for a year or two, but it is a weird little exception that exists out there. Another thing that can be used is a personal services contract. And what this is daughter or son is taking care of mom, and they basically get paid by mom to take care of them. the money that is given to the child is exempt from any kind of penalties. So, for example, I take care of my mother and I enter into a contract with her that I do her laundry and I take her to her exams and I clean her house and do things like that. And we have determined before the services began, there was a price that we determined and we executed that in writing. That's exempt the money. The downside to it is it has to be determined beforehand. All too often what will happen is somebody will be taking care of a parent for 2-3 years and then mom will say, well, I really want to pay them something for that service that they gave them. I'm going to give them $100,000. It doesn't work. That's a divestment because you're giving them something for past services. But if they would have ahead of time said, I'm going to pay them X money a month to take care of me and to do these things and did it in writing, that money could have been exempt. So it is something that you have to do ahead of time. One of the downsides to these preemptive, these personal service contracts is that it is income to the person receiving the money. It's like a job. So you do pay taxes on it. One way or the other, the government will make you pay taxes on something. But it is taxed. But again, you can move a lot of money to kids that are just basically taking care of their parents anyways, and you could move that money to the child without it being penalized for Medicaid purposes. And we can go to the next one. We talked about preemptive planning, and it's perfect for the house, for that cottage that's owned, hunting land, things of that nature, assets you're not living on. However, there's the times that you just have to do emergency planning. You can't plan ahead of time. It might be a sudden stroke. It might be somebody is suffering from dementia, and it's just gone on to the point where they're going to have to go into a nursing home. I kind of said earlier, and it is absolutely a true story, that I asked a client when her father was going into nursing home, and she did say 2 o'clock. So we did emergency planning. There are also, when we talk about emergency planning, there are certain assets that you just can't really plan for ahead of time. And there's just kind of nothing you can do about them. And those are the 401ks, the IRAs, things of that nature. You really can't plan ahead of time for them. And so what we do is we leave that to emergency planning. Again, emergency planning can be available for single persons or for married couples. We do both. And one of the things, if you walk away with nothing else in this little seminar, is to know that it's really never too late to do something. You could be in a nursing home for a year and still do emergency planning. You can always take care of something. So it's almost the fact that it's never too late to do some sort of planning. So let's dive in a little bit into the emergency planning part of it. Converting assets. Now, again, we're going to hit this at 30,000 feet. This isn't going to be a real deep dive. I mean, there's hundreds of techniques that you can use when it comes to emergency planning. But one of the big ones is converting an asset. Certain assets under Medicaid are exempt or not counted. They are they're thought to be something that you can keep. So for example, I had said earlier about a car, that you could have a car, you can have furniture, you can have jewelry, the home that you live in, if it's emergency planning, is an exempt asset. So what happens is that we take the money that is countable, like a money market account, let's say, or stocks, and we put them into assets that are not countable, like a car. So an example might be that somebody needs to spend down $50,000 in order to get onto Medicaid. They could take that $50,000 and spend it on their care, which would be perfectly doable. It might take 3 or 4 or 5 months for them to spend that down in order to get on Medicaid. They could also take that $50,000 and buy an SUV, and that car is an exempt asset. Or they might say they don't want to spend it all on a car. They buy a car for $30,000, which is really not unreasonable. They buy a TV, they buy new furniture, they buy new clothing, they get their wedding ring resized, all this sort of stuff, and they've just spent down $50,000, and they're now able to get on Medicaid to pay for nursing home. They could also take, let's say they had the $50,000 and they still had a house in their name. They didn't do any kind of preemptive planning. They still have a house in their name. They could pay their property taxes with that $50,000, or put on a new roof, or get new windows, or put an addition onto the house, or something like that, that could take that money and make it from a countable asset, which would be just money, and put it into an asset that is exempt, and they are able to get on Medicaid at that point. That's one of the ways that we do emergency planning, is to kind of convert an asset. I had a client who he had come in and he had to spend down, I think it was about $20,000 of his wife's money in order to get her on Medicaid. And he was, he was in need of a new car, and he really had a hankering to get a new TV and DVD, and, you know, kind of like this sound system and stuff for his TV. And we basically sent him on a spending trip. And it was about the happiest I've ever seen a client, when you basically tell him that he can go spend $20,000 or $30,000 and go buy the stuff that he needs. But it was a way to convert those assets from a countable asset into an exempt asset. And it's all, again, perfectly legal to do. We can go to the next asset. The next asset, the next slide. The IRAs and the 401ks and 403bs and things of that nature are a little bit more complicated. You could take that asset, cash it out, turn it into money, and make it, and then invest it into a non-countable asset. So I could take a $100,000 IRA, cash it out, invest it in my home, and it would go from a countable asset to a non-countable asset. But the problem is, when I cash out that IRA, I get taxed on cashing it out. And this is kind of becomes a problem when you go to liquidate IRAs and 401ks, that the tax, you get hit with the tax. There's a somewhat complicated but very effective way that you can use IRAs and 401ks in 403bs, and you can take that asset and basically you do a Medicaid annuity. And what happens with it is that you take it from being an IRA or 401k and you turn it into this Medicaid annuity. It has to meet specific things for it to be Medicaid eligible. But if you meet all those, you could save about half of that IRA or 401k. And for people that are in an emergency situation, that is a godsend to them. If they come in with a $200,000, $300,000 IRA, and we can put it into a Medicaid annuity, and they can save $150,000, $200,000 of it, they're happy as can be. Now, the rest of it does go towards their care, and I won't get into the specifics of how that works because it has to do with math, and I hate math. But what happens with that other part of it is it pays for the penalty period, and they get to keep, the family gets to keep about, as I said, about half of that 401k or IRA. And it works very, very nicely. It doesn't get taxed either when it gets transferred to this Medicaid annuity, because of the good people at the IRS have determined that if it is converted from an IRA or 401k into a Medicaid annuity, there's no tax involved. And so it works very well. But again, it is it's a complicated way of doing it. But if somebody walks in and they're going into a nursing home and their assets are all locked up in IRAs or 401ks, that's really the only way to go if you don't want to liquidate them all and pay the tax on it. The last slide, I think it's the last slide, maybe it's not the last slide, is if there are any veterans out there, it's possible that you could be eligible for aid and attendance for in order to pay for your long-term care. Aid and attendance is a program that is under the VA that is available, I should say, for veterans and spouses who are in need of regular aid and attendance. So it might be the inability to dress or use the toilet, something like that. But what it does is that this program covers in-home care, assisted living, and it will cover nursing home also. There are restrictions to it. You have to have served during wartime, and Congress defines what that is. And so, for example, for the Korean War, it runs the 3 years of the Korean War. Vietnam, it runs from like 1964 to 1975. And for the War on Terror, it runs from 1991 to the present. World War II runs from 41 to 1947, I believe, because of the occupation of Japan. So if you serve during wartime, and you don't have to have served in country, just during wartime, you could be available for this assistance from the VA. Again, there are restrictions, just like Medicaid. You have to be under a certain amount of money, and you have to have a certain income and stuff like that. But the nice thing is the planning for the VA benefits are very similar to Medicaid. So if you use things like a nursing home trust or something like that, you can become eligible for the VA benefits. But I just wanted you guys to kind of know that those are available for veterans if you're eligible. Very good program, but not widely used. We can go to the next slide, which is just the action steps. What I would basically say is for most people is for them to review their existing estate plan. All too often, people will do an estate plan mainly when their kids are little, and they set up this estate plan, and then they put it away and they forget about it. And that plan gets stale. The people that they've appointed, they may not even speak to anymore. They may not, You know, they might have trusts set up for the children that aren't necessary anymore. It just doesn't work anymore. They are, they're the people that need to update those plans. You know, as I said, having a power of attorney that really works for you, having a healthcare power of attorney, having a will or trust that really works for you is important. The other one is, and I'll modify this to making an appointment. You're more than welcome to make an appointment with us to explore preemptive planning. But even if you have questions, feel free to give me a call, drop me an email, something like that. And it is we'll be happy to talk to you, clarify something. A lot of the stuff we've hit is very broad and it's complicated. And so hitting it at a very broad level is, you know, sometimes even more confusing. So we'd be happy to talk to you and kind of get the facts and you know, give you an idea of whether it makes sense for you. So we'd be happy to do that. And then we go to the next slide. It's just questions. We can answer questions, Jeff.
Yeah, let me jump in here and I'll unmute everybody. And let me see. We'll see. All right. So everybody's unmuted. If you have a question, if you want to type it in on the chat window, if you can find that. So we'll give it a minute or two for questions to come up. And
should I press chat, Jeff?
Yeah, you can open that up. I'm looking at the chat window right now, and I'm not seeing anything come up at quite yet.
To a loan to a child.
So, well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Pat, thank you so much for offering up your time, expertise, and knowledge to share with us. Oh, I do have a couple of. There's a question here. What if you have a loan to a child? How does that count?
Right. A loan to a child, which is can be a way of doing it. However, the problem is that that child must be paying you back. If you forgive the loan, then that it is basically looked at as a divestment. So you gave the child you gave the child $100,000. They should be paying you back. You do have to spend that money down. So there are usually other ways of doing it than doing a loan. But if you have a loan with a child, if they're paying it back, it is, you know, basically it's an asset to you, but it's probably income because most of it's going to be taxable.
Okay. There's another question here. Can I set an irrevocable trust myself, or do I need an attorney?
I think there are probably trusts online or something that are irrevocable. However, I would recommend an attorney, and not just because I am one. You don't have to go with me. There are other people that do irrevocable trusts. So it is, but I would use an attorney. The reason is that Medicaid is a confusing area. It is a area of law that's not based on any sort of rationale or intelligence or any of those things. And so what ends up happening is there's a lot of like weird rules that go into it. One of the important things of when you're putting together an irrevocable trust is that you want to have these little you want to cut off completely the control that person would have. If you screw that up, it's not worth the paper it's written on. The other thing is too, you want to have access to those funds if you would need them. And again, if you screw that up, it's not worth the paper it's written on. It'll either handcuff you or it will basically not work in the way that you want it. So I would recommend that you use an attorney.
Okay. There's a follow-up question from Peggy on why would a loan not count toward the nursing home asset?
It would, but if it's in payment mode, it would actually be an asset to that child. I'm sorry, to that person that is receiving it. So if you gave $100,000 to a child and they were paying it back, that money would be every month would basically be disqualifying you. And so if they're paying it back, then it is income to you, and it can be an asset to you. There's a lot of specific rules that have to be followed. If the loan is being paid back, it has to be paid back over your lifetime. It has to be, it can't be forgiven. Can't be, basically end on death, that sort of thing. And so what ends up happening is there's usually other ways of getting where you want to go with it without doing a loan, I found.
Okay. Diane asks, what type of costs are to be anticipated when doing an estate plan?
Sure. For wills with powers of attorney and everything that goes with it, that would be like, let's say, a will, durable power of attorney for finance, for healthcare, HIPAA, waiver, marital property agreement, all that stuff. You're probably looking at under $1,000 to do a revocable trust. You're probably looking between $2,000 and $3,000, depending on what your situation is. A nursing home trust usually runs about $3,500 to $4,000, depending on, again, what goes into it. So that would be the general price structure.
Okay. All right. I hope that answered your question, Diane. Do we have any other questions out there that Pat or myself? You can see here the slide that's up right now is our Prosperity Partners team here at Prospera Credit Union. I introduced myself earlier, but we also have Hong Tran, who joined us several months ago as another advisor here, and Aaron Bishop, who most of you have been in contact with in RSVPing for this seminar tonight, for this presentation. And so I just want to introduce the team here at Prospera. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight or making yourselves available to just get a better understanding what it takes to protect assets from nursing home costs. Pat had shared that there's options with trust, there's options for deeding assets away and being preemptive and emergency planning. And so we'll be following up with all of you with an email to kind of give our contact information and then give you opportunity to ask questions and perhaps set up a time to meet when we get the all clear and we can start seeing each other face to face. But we're using technologies such as this tonight to be able to stay in communication, continue to learn, and just be better people with our own money. So if there's no other questions tonight, I just want to thank you again for joining us. And by all means, feel free to shoot us an email, give us a call. You can see our phone numbers up there on the screen right now for Prosperity Partners. And we'd love to talk with you or answer an email. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk to you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Stay safe.